Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining me this morning. So last year you were all recognized as top up-and-comers as part of this inaugural program with Against the Grain and with the Charleston Conference to recognize rising stars in the library and information profession. So I'm so glad that you're here with me this year, 1 year later, to talk about what's been going on in your life and your career over the past year. So tell me about what's new in your career since the last time we were all here in Charleston.
Yeah, I can start. I've been doing some new research projects, things like that, but the most fun thing I've been doing is I've taken over as liaison for hospitality and tourism management, which is a lot of fun. I have a background in restaurant management before I became a librarian. And it's a learning community, meaning we get to do all kinds of activities outside of the classroom. So for example, when I go back home tomorrow, we're taking the learning community on a field trip to Indianapolis, and we are touring the old spaghetti factory in the JW Marriott.
Whoa.
Yeah, so it's been a lot of fun.
Oh, okay, nice, thanks.
Sounds exciting.
It is.
So since we last spoke, Erin, I'm still licensing and acquisitions librarian at the University of Connecticut, so I'm representing today with my Huskies t-shirt. I think probably the most new and exciting thing in my life is that I'm now elected Vice President, President-elect for the Association of College and Research Libraries New England chapter.
Oh, congrats.
So I get to run the annual conference this year. It's in May 6th in Portland, Maine. Come for the weekend, stay for the conference. So I'm excited to lead that process.
Great, thanks.
And so probably the most exciting thing for me is that I got approved for sabbatical. So I will not be at the university from January to June. I'll be working with Mark Puente, who's the Director of Diversity for the Association of Research Libraries.
Wow, okay. Well, I'm really impressed. I also admit I'm kind of jealous when I hear the word sabbatical. That sounds just lovely. What about some research projects you've been working on or that you'd like to be working on? Especially since I learned a lot about you last year as part of the whole up-and-comer librarian process. So I learned about what you were doing at that time. Is there anything over the past year that has sparked your interest or that you've started on as far as your research?
Yeah, well, I think we talked last year a little bit about the Student Soybean Innovation Competition that I work with. Dave Zwicky, our patent librarian, he and I have started doing some focus groups with them to learn about student information use in innovation competitions and what their challenges are. So that's some research we've been doing over the past year, and going forward we hope to do a more longitudinal study to see what the impact on students' careers is after competing in that sort of competition.
Wow.
So there's already some research talking about a positive impact on career choices with undergraduate research. So we're hoping to kind of replicate that sort of study, but with an innovation competition.
I'm not familiar with innovation competitions. What could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the one that we run, the Student Soybean Innovation Competition, the students have to create a novel product made from soybeans. Maybe we didn't talk about this last year. There's about 30 teams throughout the course of the year, and it's a year-long project. So they start in October, and the judging is then in March. Sponsored by the Indiana Soybean Alliance. They have to actually prototype a new product. They do a market analysis, a patent search, and that's where Dave and I come in. So all of the students consult with Dave, and they consult with me to do these sorts of projects. And it's really interesting as a business librarian because most of these students are not business students. So you have to try and teach market sizing to engineers. And they say, well, what's the formula for a target market? Oh, no. There is no formula for a target market. So that's a lot of fun. And it's very high stakes. The Soybean Alliance funds $20,000 for first place, 10 for second, 5 for third. And the students who complete the project can apply for a paid internship to go through our university's Fire Starter program, which is run through our Burton D. Morgan Center for Entrepreneurship and the Foundry, and it's basically how to take their product to market.
Who knew soybeans were so competitive?
It's very Indiana.
Wow, I like it. How about you, Michael?
So I think last time we spoke, I mentioned that I was a grant recipient for the Institute for Research Design and Librarianship out in California. So as a result of that kind of week-long intensive training, we were able to conduct a survey of faculty at the University of Connecticut regarding their perceptions and practices for open access. So right now we're deep in the weeds with a statistical analysis for that piece and learning some new techniques in SPSS, which is exciting. Concurrently, a colleague at Yale and I are working on a totally different project about essentially we're conducting a environmental scan of vendor product interfaces and identifying placement of common tasks or services across a wide variety of interfaces and databases, discovery services, and so on, and tying that into a universal design and user experience framework, and hopefully either generating or proposing recommendations for alignment of those services going forward. Quite different from faculty surveys and statistical analysis, but I think the combination of open access and user experience really ties into my research interests.
Well, as someone who spends a lot of time in the world of, vendor platforms, that sounds like a very worthy venture. How about you, Kiyomi?
So my research is really kind of all over the place. I follow the scholar practitioner model, and since I practice in a lot of areas, I just do projects that make sense when I need to know something in one of those areas. So about 3 years ago, we did a survey across the state, but that was mostly responded to by people who worked at one of the universities or colleges in the state, looking at STEM needs regarding outreach. And so one of my goals before I go on sabbatical is for the group of us that's been working on it, we have some sociologists and some people from the Teachers College and someone from Extension, but and we're the ones writing the article, but this all came out of a Big Ideas seed grant that I wrote the proposal for, and we wrote that proposal and developed this project by talking to people from the university, from nonprofits, from the state government, from the local school district, and from industry, so that we could really get at what was it that were the pain points that people didn't feel were being addressed. And one of the things that I thought was interesting was there was just this huge hunger to connect with other people. As with many places, we have an aging faculty, but that's also true, in a lot of the businesses and a lot of the nonprofits. And as these people leave, people were doing things because Joe said to or Karen said to, but they didn't have a connection to the wider organization. It was like this single person. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do, and I think that we've been doing successfully, is invite each other, have more open calls, let me ask someone who else I could ask to come to this, and make it so that, I'm not just saying only you can come, but you can come and pass this on to anybody else who wants to. And it's not that we have, dozens and dozens of these. No one has time for that. But there's usually at least 1 or 2 things a year from either the state government when we were revising the science standards, or something at the university, or other organizations, where we just try and have that bigger conversation, because there is a ton of people working in STEM education and outreach, and it overlaps. Some is done during school time, most of it is done out of school time. Some is for only small children, some is for the whole family, and it just makes sense to work together and partner. So one of the events I coordinate is the SciPop Interactive event at our local Smithsonian Regional Air and Space Museum. And it's funny because it's 4 hours, so it's a lot of work on the day of. But it's actually not that much work planning, because the museum provides the setup, and they provide the tables, and they do the drop class, and we tell them what we're bringing and what sections they need to be in, and then they just figure out how it goes, and we just come and look for the signs, right? So for us, that's relaxing. For them, it's relaxing because they don't have to set anything else up. All they have to do is set that up and clean up. The people that come, they either do activities, which I bring, which I borrow activity kits from our Materials Research Science Center. And so these have all of the instructions and all of the ingredients that you need except for water. That's the only thing that you'll need. And they have these lovely cards that say on one side, the simple explanation, and on the other side is the in detail explanation for that person that really just has to know more. So you don't even have to necessarily know anything. If you're science literate and you're a science enthusiast, especially if you're a scientist, this makes it really easy. Other people, they bring their activities that they use for their own outreach efforts, or that they're developing for the outreach efforts, to test them in just a very enthusiastic audience. And we pay for children's admission while this is going on, so that you only have to pay for one adult to accompany the child, because it can get very pricey. Science museums are not free, so a parent's admission is $12. Children are $6. If you have 3 kids, you're already up to $30. So we make it so that it's more accessible, and usually we pay for 200 to 400 admissions.
Well, conference and event planning is an absolute just weak point of mine, and so I'm really impressed that you're involved in this sort of thing. I wanted to know if you have research interests outside of your professional career focus. And I know that there's not a lot of time to do that. We're all just kind of keeping our heads above water with our day-to-day. We're maybe trying to make tenure. We are trying to be, part of a professional network of research and publication. But if time or money were not factors, for example, would there be areas that you'd be interested in researching that are not necessarily within the world of library or information studies?
Yeah, I can answer that. So I've been working intermittently on a project I started in undergrad in a class called Tolkien's Medieval Inspirations. So one of the papers I wrote in that class was looking at the character Bjorn, who is basically a bear man hermit living in the woods of Middle-earth, and trying to link back that character from Tolkien's book The Hobbit to medieval inspiration, so aromatic influences that Tolkien was exposed to and then represented in this work. So it completely has nothing to do with librarianship or information science or licensing and acquisitions, but it's kind of one of my pet projects and has been for a while. So if I had more time, I'd definitely like to close out that project and try to get it published in a Tolkien-related journal.
Well, if you were able to somehow sneak in a presentation on that at a library conference, I would definitely show up. Right? That sounds really interesting. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Well, I'm actually working right now on trying to get a study abroad approved.
Oh.
And it's on the business of beer.
Oh.
Right.
All right.
Well,
I like this.
aside from this, I'm also working with my husband to open a brewery. So doing research that kind of links those two together is something I'm very interested in and think is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Purdue also recently started within our School of Food Science, Department of Food Science within the School of Agriculture, a fermentation minor. We have a brewery on campus. So I'm trying to figure out a way to link all of these things together. And I know this is still within the bounds of what I do because, again, I've got that tenure looming over my head. But if tenure weren't an option, if money weren't an option, I would just do study abroads all the time. Like, it's just travel and link all of those things together.
Well, if you ever need any, taste testers, or if you're looking for just a focus group on your brewery, I think you have some potential helpers here.
Good to know.
All right, so bringing it back to the conference, this year's opening keynote and the Hyde Park debate are both addressing the topic of open scholarship, and particularly that there are both benefits and pitfalls to making scholarship freely available for reading and reuse. So what are your thoughts on this?
I'm very pro open access, but again, it's also very self-serving, right? Because I'm tenure track, I need people to cite me, and it's been shown time and time again that if something's open access, it gets cited more frequently. So it's kind of a selfish reason to be pro open access, but there's also the ethical obligation, I think, to help make information and research available in places that don't have the money to buy expensive journals.
Right.
Yeah, I think going off that, I think in a lot of the conversations about open access, it's very important to kind of mentally center why we support open access. So, as you said, it's not simply about reducing the subscription costs or about addressing publisher profit margin. It's fundamentally an ethical imperative to make knowledge production freely available to everyone, regardless of their income or of their institutional or geographic affiliations and locations. At the same time, we need to be keenly aware that introducing open access has the potential to create new ills, right? And particularly with some APC models, to reinforce existing inequities. So that's something that we as librarians and as folks in the information industry need to be keenly aware of as we continue to push open access forward.
Good point.
So I already went off on this in the Trend Lab session yesterday where we were being recorded. So I'll try not to repeat what I said there because you can watch the Trend Lab recording when it's been processed. But one thing I didn't touch on as much more in passing is that people don't realize how much private funding funds research. And so I always like to caution librarians that don't have research experience in the sciences that you shouldn't assume that the scientist research is funded by the government. So I did research as an undergraduate for 3.5 years, and my research was funded by the Petroleum Research Foundation, which is not a government institution. And we were doing basic research, so most of it over time gets published once you find enough to publish. But they have first dibs on anything that will help them to create better fuel efficiencies, and those are trade secrets. So not everything that you do becomes public, and there's a reason for that. And I mean, you could argue, but the corporations are not going to give up that, and you're not going to get to do that research if no one funds it, and it's really important that things be more efficient. So there's kind of this push-pull between getting things done and making things open. You know, the same thing in drug discovery. So the pharmaceutical companies have discovered that it cost a lot of money to be wrong. And then they're all trying to do similar research, so then they're all wrong and they all paid to be wrong. So they have started to share non-competitive intelligence of things that didn't work because nobody needs to be wasting that money, and it's been going on for several years now. That's like good open stuff because other people know and they don't need to go down this path that didn't work at all. Maybe from that information they can find a path that does work. So there's a lot of issues, I think, also about copyright. You know, people violate people's copyright all the time when they do Creative Commons, and then they charge people for it, people who can't afford it, like teachers and people in developing countries. And so, you know, I support open access if the people that I'm trying to give the access to actually get it and don't pay for it, but I don't support open access in that we're not cracking down on people who are violating it and who are charging people when I said this has to be freely available for you to use it. And that's the difference between non-commercial and commercial license.
Right, well, and I think you bring up a great point that it's this balancing act that we have to do as librarians. And I'm at a land-grant institution, right? So the mission of my school is to serve all of the people of Indiana. So where do we make those decisions when we're, again, having private funded research, but it's against the mission of what we do as a school, right? And we run into this in business as well. We need to support the entrepreneurs throughout the state, but we have these contracts with vendors saying that the resources can't be used for business, right? They can only be used for student use and academic use. So it's kind of this balancing act.
And as a land grant that really takes seriously that extension, like so much of it is supporting businesses and other things that are not farms, which people don't realize. We have this conflict.
Yes, yes, it's very difficult to figure out, you know, what that balancing act is, where the line in the sand is.
Do you think that the ability to tie back the efforts or the, you know, the idea of an ethical imperative of open access, tying it back or connecting it back to an institutional mission, is that a good thing ultimately because it gives you a little bit more clout in maybe redirecting library funding or pushing back on vendors or saying no to models that don't support that because you're ultimately not able to support the institutional mission? Or do you think that that actually makes it more difficult to, you know, work within the world of open access?
Well, anytime you have a mission, it can help direct your decision making, right? I mean, that's why we do strategic planning, all of that. So I think it can help. But again, it just comes back to part of the mission is helping all the citizens of the state, but then also these partnerships with corporations help create jobs, right? So I don't know what the answer is there.
Well, I think we have enough, you know, good brains in this conference to hopefully figure it out one day. Michael, you were...
Yeah, I think openness is fundamental to state universities, right? We all have sunshine laws and freedom of information acts. And I think it's an opportunity for state schools in particular to lead by example in the arena of licensing and journal packages and bringing more transparency and, dare I say, openness to that process, which will have very positive implications, I think, for open access as a whole.
I like to hear that because so you're all working at, you know, large research universities. I have so far worked in the realm of very small, private, independent liberal arts colleges where often we're supporting the OA landscape by simply being free riders and simply being, you know, those who are watching what's happening because we maybe don't have the resources, the people, the clout, and the ability to be the ones leading the pack. And I firmly believe that by supporting, that being free riders, which I feel like that has a negative connotation, I need to come up with a better word for that. But being in that role does actually support and help bolster the landscape. But it is a bit hard to sort of sit back and watch how things are unfolding and not feel like you're part of the action.
Right.
So there's a lot of chatter in our profession about the value of the traditional MLS or MLIS. I know that in recent hires at my institution, we have adjusted the description to specify that you can have an MLS, that's definitely preferred, but if you have enough experience, if you have a degree that is maybe, in an alternate area that is still applicable, then we're going to consider that as well. So I'm interested in your thoughts or your advice that you would maybe give to students or professionals who are interested in careers in librarianship or information studies, particularly related to the MLS or MLIS.
I would say if you want to work in a library without a library degree, please do some research on how libraries, especially if you're interviewing in an academic library, how they work, what the process is. If we're a tenure leading institution, you still need to understand the basics of how that works, because 99% of the people you're going to work with that are librarians have that requirement. So if you come in and you have great experience, but you have no clue about any of our processes that you could look up reading on a library school website in a few minutes, we're not going to take you that seriously as a candidate, because you obviously didn't do us the courtesy of just reading a few web pages. It's kind of like if someone does have a library degree and they come to interview and they didn't bother to read the top 3 news stories that have been on the university website for like a year. And they don't know anything about them. And then we're like, well, you obviously didn't care enough to take 10 minutes this morning to look at the website or on your trip. So maybe you're not that invested in us.
Okay. So my feelings on this have changed over time. I used to feel very, very strongly that you needed to have the MLS, MLIS. At Purdue, we have changed our requirements as well. And to apply for one of our faculty librarian jobs, you can have your MLS, or you can have a PhD in a subject area. And those people have been extremely successful. They come in, and so it's you have a deficit either way, right? Because I came in with a ton of library experience, but no research experience, right? And now I'm expected to research and produce at a level with all of the faculty across the university, right? Because we go up through the main university tenure system. So that was a steep learning curve for me. If you come in with a PhD, you're really set on that end, and then you have to learn the librarianship piece. So I think either way you're having to learn, it's just which piece of that pie. And we've had people, we have one of our bioinformatics librarians, is an R expert and is really just incredible at data manipulation and visualization, and he's been extremely helpful to the rest of us who don't have that sort of experience. So I used to feel very strongly that you needed that, but now I think you can learn it on the job if you have a tangential set of experiences.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I'll say that one of the potential great benefits of the MLS or in library industry experience is that you hopefully will have a deeper contextualized understanding of where your role and your work fits into the broader information industry ecosystem. Oftentimes, the folks I've worked with who have deep data expertise or deep IT expertise, but don't have that MLS or that library background, don't necessarily have that contextualized understanding. So in terms of setting priorities, in terms of strategizing, it's sometimes more challenging for them lacking that background, but still having a kind of a subject expertise. As far as advice to MLS students or people considering degrees or early career librarians, I think it really, for me, it's always gone back to peer mentorship, to having that network of people of similar depth of experience working in similar industries who you can talk to, who you can share experiences with, who have your back, as it were. And this, to tie it back to the up-and-comers, so last year I was an up-and-comer, of course, and my boss nominated me, which was wonderful and kind of classic mentorship model. This year I nominated someone I worked with at a previous institution. We had served as references for each other. We collaborate on various things. And so, and this year she won. So I think that's a kind of a quintessential example of the benefits of peer mentorship. That give you that network of support and morale boosting, and that hopefully carry on across the career.
That's exactly what I love to hear, and that's why this up-and-comers recognition was so important for me to get off the ground, because I think once you have had that mentorship in your own life, it really inspires you to want to pass it on, pay it forward and be a mentor for someone else. Do you, Heather and Kiyomi, have you had good mentors in your career or in your life?
Absolutely. All through my librarianship career, actually, starting with one of my professors in my degree program, who is now a very good friend. She mentored me through, this is a second career for me.
Oh, right.
So she was able to give me a lot of guidance, and I learned about all of the different types of librarianship that I didn't know were a thing. And then my first position at Butler University, the Dean of Libraries there, Julie Miller, is just exceptional, and she's a visionary, and she was very helpful, and I still occasionally meet with her, and she gives me really good career advice. And my current boss, our division head, Erla Haynes, is also easily the most supportive supervisor I've ever had. And the mentorship I've gotten is phenomenal. We also, in terms of peer mentorship, which you mentioned, we have a group of pre-tenure librarians who meet regularly to support one another, talk about the challenges that we're having, talk about research collaborations. And this is a really good area where those librarians who have PhDs and the librarians who have the MLS can come together and really work to support one another, which has been great. So I've worked with some of the PhDs who've helped me with my research, and then talking with us and working with us, they begin to understand some of the principles of our profession that they wouldn't otherwise be exposed to.
Oh, great. Yeah. That sounds like a great group.
It's really good, yeah.
I guess my perspective is different because I was a career changer. So I graduated from the University of Redlands with a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry and minors in Music and History. This is really normal for Redlands. It's a liberal arts university for people who really want multiple, minors in things that are not related to their degrees in a lot of ways. And the first week of, before classes start, they have you choose a class that's just for fun, but that knocks out 2 or 3 of your requirements. So I chose science and fiction, and the faculty member leading that class met with us every day for a week and then was our mentor until you chose something that was out of her area, but her area was chemistry and I was a chemistry major. So we actually still keep in close contact and meet up whenever we can. And I did 3.5 years of research with her as an undergraduate, because at Redlands you have to write a thesis in the sciences as part of your graduation requirements. So I had done things kind of backwards, and then I worked in industry for about 8-9 years, and then I got a degree in library and information sciences. So I feel like it's valuable to have both, not necessarily an advanced degree in another one, but to have worked on it, to have done research, because it was less of a culture shock for me. It was kind of like going back to what I knew, just librarians research different things than I was researching in chemistry, and they have different citation styles. Actually, I prefer APA, like, ACS style. It's so hard. There's no set rules. You just have to look everything up.
Oh, geez.
And if it doesn't exist, then they're going to correct you because there's no rules you can follow to guess what they're going to assign it. It was less stressful. But definitely the tenure system was an adjustment. But I think that even in libraries, since I started, I met people who became mentors. I was part of the Association of Research Libraries Diversity Scholars Program, and I've been a librarian. This is my 9th year. So obviously it worked for me. It's a good program. But, and I also helped run several mentoring programs over the years. And most recently, I was chair of the ACRL Dr. E.J. Josie Spectrum Mentor Committee. So we select the mentors for those people who are Spectrum scholars that are affiliated with the Association of College and Research Libraries, and then occasionally try and do some programming and stuff. This year, I'm not the chair, but I'm still on the committee. I felt like I gave them more work last year, and I didn't want to leave the person after me having to do all this work that was my idea. But I want to say, if there's one thing you can do is meet lots of people and tell them what you're interested in. Don't ask them for the job. They cannot give you a job.
Yes.
And nobody likes that, and that's a turnoff. But tell people what you're interested in, what you're actually interested in, not like, oh, I'm interested in everything. We can't help you find a job that's everything, right? But if you tell me what you're interested in, and I hear of an opening later, and we had a nice conversation, and we talked about, you know, like Lord of the Rings or something that we had in common, then I will remember you. And when I see that job opportunity and you've given me your card or you've connected with me on LinkedIn, I will probably think of you. And if I can figure out who you were, I will, which is why you need to connect with me, I will forward that to you and be like, hey, you should look at this. And if I know someone at that institution, I'll say, hey, I met this person. I encourage them to apply. You might want to take a look at them. I don't know anybody who's gotten a job in libraries or science that wasn't like just some really like clerical entry-level job that wasn't by referral in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it was after the fact. Maybe somebody found out that they were applying and they knew them and they knew someone at the institution. But most people have some connection.
My hope is that everyone just knows me for my obsession with Murder, She Wrote. That's
That's a perfectly
going to
valid
be my
thing.
legacy, I think, yeah. So what excites you all about the future of libraries?
I think the same thing that excites me about the past of libraries, right? The impact we can have on our communities, right? And this is public, this is academic, this is all levels of librarianship. We are afforded the opportunity to impact people's lives very directly.
I love that. Thanks.
I'm excited to see libraries increasingly embracing collective action. There's been, I mean, consortia have always existed. There have always been collaborations across academic and public libraries and others. But in the last few years, that has really seen an uptick, I think, in terms of collective collections, in terms of more efficient interlibrary lending, in terms of consortial licenses in Europe and North America. And I think that gives us some real opportunities to do our work at scale and to be able to, as a result of that, be able to commit more resources to areas, to strategic areas, and not purely in areas of collection maintenance and doing the same work across hundreds of institutions, when that work could be done more efficiently and more effectively at scale. So I'm really excited to see that growth, that trajectory continue.
Thanks.
I would say that I'm also excited for the potential to do things at like a national or like a North American level. They've done a really good job getting started with this in the European Union, and it feels like every few years like they boost it a little bit more and it gets better and better. But we keep defunding things, and then somebody has to like come along and very nicely take it over, because it isn't, you know, random list of citations that you can find elsewhere. It's information that is only in this one database, and it just kills me. And so I really hope that that happens, because I just really like looking things up. Like, I'm such a nerd, and I just want to know like why everything happens. So if I have a question, I go looking for the information. And if things were more centralized and more things that we decided were for the public good were open, I could research so much more just for my own curiosity.
I love the you know, really open nerdiness of our profession.
Oh,
I really
yes,
do.
all of us 100%.
So on that line, what are y'all reading right now?
I'm actually reading for the first time the Sherlock Holmes series.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've never read them. I mean, I've consumed a lot of Sherlock Holmes media, right? But never the books. So I'm reading those.
Okay, well then I just have to say I'm also reading something that I've wanted to read for a long time, which is Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose, and it has that Sherlock Holmes connection. You know, he's William of Baskerville, and he's investigating this series of murders. It's terrific.
Well, I review for Library Journal, so I'm guaranteed reading at least 30 books a year.
Oh.
Right now, I'm actually reading a book on reference librarianship and connecting it to a social justice framework.
Oh, right.
So it's fascinating, case studies and theory alike. And speaking of nerdiness, the other book I'm reading is Mort by Terry Pratchett.
Oh, okay.
So the other thing I'm doing is a reread of the Discworld novels.
Nice. Yes, this
I was
is my
working on that
first.
last year, and I'm still chugging away.
You should read them in order.
That's what I'm
because
doing.
his writing improves as he goes along. So you won't
does.
like the first book if you read the last book first.
I
But
should
if you
have
read
a
the
pen
first
here
book and
to,
you
like,
read them
make
in order,
notes.
it's a nice progression.
I love everyone's enthusiasm.
This is my favorite question to ask any group. What's everybody reading? Any group of librarians, and we all get really excited. How about you,
We do.
Kiyomi?
So I'm not reading it at the moment, but it's on my list of books to read. I read a lot. I read every day, but I get distracted. I'm like, oh, I really want to read this right now. So I have, my pile, and then I'm adding like 2 books to it a day,
Right.
which is a good thing that I read at least a book a day. But what I want to read next, if I don't just get distracted by another shiny book, is 415 Inc. by Riss Ford. My friend is actually the author, and I want to say it's her 9th or 10th book, somewhere in there around 10. And I wanted to read it for a while. And there's, I think, tattoo parlors involved in it, and she writes a lot of mystery books, and most of them have characters that are from like Japan or Korea or China. And she's half Japanese, half Hawaiian, so I really like reading that and getting that perspective for someone else who is also part Asian and just seeing the culture. I'm sure some people think she's making some of this stuff up, but it really is like that.
I'm going to have to ask you after this to add that to my Goodreads.
I know. I was saying I really should have been keeping a list here. Yeah.
Good news, we're being taped.
That's true. Yes. So, what's your favorite thing about the Charleston conference?
Well, now it's that a whole bunch of business librarians come.
Oh.
We do this sort of unofficial business librarians track, and there's probably 20, 25 of us here.
Oh wow.
So business librarianship is kind of fragmented. We have BRASS, which is in RUSA, and then there's the business and finance librarians in SLA. So there's no one conference where we can all get together. So this has been a really good networking experience for me over the last few years.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'll echo that. For me, Charleston Conference is incredibly valuable, not just because of the sessions, but because of the people. This is my 3rd consecutive year coming. There will be a 4th and 5th guaranteed. And even now, it's already like coming to reunions of old friends and frenemies, being a vendor negotiator. But yeah, it's just a great networking experience, I think, and that's where the most vital value lies.
I like the dates of the conference. It's much more convenient than coming in on like a Thursday and leaving on a Tuesday. And I don't know why it's more convenient, but it is. And so I've been able to have many more conversations than I usually can over the same time period with people at like Midwinter or ALA Annual or ACRL. And to me, the conferences are all about the conversations with people, with small groups, like reunions, like you said, but then you always end up talking business like at least 50% of the time, even though you also catch up on people's family. But also having time to have longer conversations with people who work for vendors and understanding what they're trying to do, or maybe sometimes setting them straight when they're like, we think this would be really great. And I'm like, we think that would be horrible, and we're not going to do that. So you can do that if you want, but we're not playing with you. So we can get each other's opinion on things because we have enough time to talk it out, as opposed to, oh, here's the like new shiny, and we're like, yeah, that's nice.
Well, and I would add to that, one of my favorite things about this conference is the way the vendors get to participate, right? You know, you go to sessions and they're parts of panels, they're members of the audience, right? And so the discussions that we have here, I think, are a lot more rich than conversations you have where the vendors are just stuck in the expo hall, right? So.
I agree, and as someone who, my first 4 years of attending, this is my 8th year attending Charleston, and I agree there's going to be a 9th and 10th, and my first few years were on the vendor side, and it was just a revelation here that I could participate, and I get to go to sessions, and now, you know, Michael, you were saying it feels like it's in your 3rd year, and you already feel like it's some sort of a reunion. When I land in Charleston every year, I feel like I'm coming home in a way. It's a wonderful feeling. So for our final question, I'm going to harken back to my friend Tom Gilson, who's a conference organizer and who taught me everything I know about conducting these interviews. And he always wraps up with, what question did I not ask that I should have? Maybe I asked everything.
I don't know. It's early.
It's very early.
I guess one easy question, what are you planning to do this afternoon? My response to that would be hopefully walking around Charleston and taking in some of the museums, going down to the waterfront, maybe taking a picture of the 2.5-mile long bridge. Is that right?
Sounds right.
So yeah, just taking some time to explore the city now that a lot of the librarians have left town.
I highly recommend that. I always leave myself the Friday afternoon to get out and explore and walk down by the waterfront. And I mean, it's an absolutely lovely, romantic, just beautiful, beautiful city.
It is.
All right, well, thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference, and thanks for joining me this morning.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.